Will has made copies of the introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes by a scholar named Harold Louis Ginsberg, H.L. Ginsberg, one of the great Bible scholars of the Hebrew Bible of the era about a century ago or three-quarters of a century ago. For example, he was my father's Bible teacher at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And the student scuttlebutt about H.L. Ginsberg is that the only problem with him is that he spoke Hebrew better than Isaiah. So sometimes he would, in his great inventiveness, come up with an emendation, a suggested emendation which would make the text flow more smoothly. And of course it is quite possible, because the Hebrew Bible was initially written only with consonants, not with vowels. So there's different ways of pointing the words to create different readings. So I would say most of his emendations hold up, but today we tend to be less willing to offer emendations than an earlier generation of scholars did. Please.
I asked this question last week, and this just kind of bothered me. Like Isaiah, he goes, "Hi, I'm Isaiah. I'm writing this book," and there were like 3 Isaiahs. Isn't that? I know you said that there were different copyright laws, but I mean, isn't that just a lie?
So the question has to do with what we call, I don't know how many we are in this we, what some of us call pseudepigrapha, pseudepigraphy, as in the word pseudo, right? A pseudonym. So we think of it as a plagiarism, as a sin against a truth for someone else to take my words and pass them off as their own. But we're talking about the opposite, taking my words and passing them off as George Washington's. Now consider if we were in a great debate about should citizenship be extended to people born into the United States of foreign parents. Let's just say theoretically that we were having a debate on that subject. And I were suddenly to find a document authored by James Madison, to speak of fellow Virginians, right? James Madison, that spoke directly to that point. Who would care what Panitz has to say about this? But everybody would want to know what James Madison had to say about it. So that is the pseudepigraphical impulse. And you're correct that contemporary notions of authorship and individuality are scandalized by that. I don't want to deny the force of the question at all, but rather to say that the forgeries that they were perpetrating were what we might call pious forgeries. First of all, they were sincere. They really believed that they understood the spirit of the great, typically was a great man, the great man they were giving voice to. Secondly, I want to point out that the job of historian back then was also different than it is today. Ever since the mid-19th century, we've had canons in the practice of history. The great German historian Ranke, Leopold Ranke, R-A-N-K-E, said the goal of the historian is to tell you wie es eigentlich gewesen, how it actually was. And we take this without demurral. I mean, we think that's obviously what a historian does. Whereas in ancient times, the historian fancied himself in part a dramatist. With what fine and stirring speech would Caesar have inspired his troops when they crossed the Rubicon? Now, Caesar is actually not the best example, because there were historians contemporary with Caesar. But we don't have all those speeches, so a historian thought that it was his job to make it up. But to make it up in the spirit of what well might have been said. So maybe that's where we can leave that. Now, today we're going to have a couple of specific readings. So I hope you have Bibles handy. If not, we have a stack of Bibles on the piano, which is a very good place for Bibles. We have time today to look at some of the classic texts in this book. It's short, but it's not short enough to read the entire book in one hour. So we'll read selections of it. And the point of this choice of selections is to give us a sense of what has sometimes been called the wisdom of resignation. That is the perspective of Kohelet. Let's look at the first 11 verses of the book. And I will offer them from H.L. Ginsberg's own translation. Someone showed me it's a blue-covered paperback. There we go. If you could just hold it up, please. You see that blue-covered, vinyl-covered book, Tanakh, T-A-N-A-K-H. That is the Jewish Publication Society translation of the Hebrew Bible. And it started coming out in the 1960s. I believe that Ecclesiastes was in a slightly later part of the project. I think it was 1969. So in Ginsberg and Committee's translation, the words of Kohelet, son of David, king in Jerusalem, which if you're using your Revised Standard Version would say the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. The next verse, you'll see a bigger difference, because you may be used to vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Very famous words. Ginsberg renders it, utter futility, said Kohelet. Utter futility, all is futile. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is greater today than it would have been in the time of King James, because the word vanity doesn't mean today what it meant in the time of King James. Vanity in the time of King James is actually closer to futility than we might think. Hevel is the Hebrew word, Hevel. Hevel is the name Abel, Cain and Abel. And what Hevel really means is exhalation. So what can you say about exhalation? It's evanescent, it's very short, it's insubstantial. So that's what the word Hevel connotes here. It's not going to endure. Whatever you're going to see is here today, gone tomorrow. Of course, it may be back again the day after tomorrow. We're going to come to that. But it in itself cannot claim endurance. A completely relevant question at this point, and one where we may have a different point of view than Kohelet, is, does its ephemeral quality lead to a pessimistic conclusion, or does it lead to a joyful affirmation of what we have while we have it? And on this question, the Bible itself is of more than one mind. Kohelet represents the pessimistic view of wisdom. You're all going to die anyway, so what's the point? Whereas other voices in the biblical choir say, of course we're going to die, but while we're here, there are things we're supposed to do, and that counts for a lot. And it's not as if one point of view decisively refutes the other point of view. They may depend on your level of blood sugar. I heard a report that someone did a study of commutations of judicial sentences. I'm sorry, I'm not saying it exactly right. When a judge would decide to suspend a sentence, that's it. And it turned out that when the judge had had the last snack was a decisive correlate. So if you are a practicing defense attorney, make sure that there's a beeline between the donut shack and the judicial offices. Okay, utter futility, said Kohelet. Utter futility, all is futile. What real value is there for a man in all the gains he makes beneath the sun? We're going to come back to this. Don't think that having a big bank account counts for more than it counts. It doesn't count for less than it counts, Kohelet will tell you, but it doesn't count for more than it counts either. And then we have this poetic, bleak but beautiful account of the recurrence of natural phenomena. which again you could understand in different ways. One generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and glides back to where it rises. Southward blowing, turning northward, ever turning, blows the wind. On its rounds the wind returns. We're going to come back to this notion of turning and returning. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. All such things are wearisome, no man can ever state them. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear enough of hearing. Only that shall happen which has happened. Only that occur which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun. And then from the poetic statement, we have a prosaic statement. Sometimes there is a phenomenon of which they say, look, this one is new. It occurred long since, in ages that went by before us. The earlier ones are not remembered. So too, those that will occur later will no more be remembered than those that will occur at the very end. I know there's some slight differences between this translation and the one that you have, and you can blame it on the fact that the translator spoke Hebrew better than the Bible. Now think about it. How many of you have gone to the ocean front and watched the waves come in? Okay, I would dare say everyone. When I ask some of my students who are not from Tidewater, why are you studying at Virginia Wesleyan, for example, or Old Dominion, but more Wesleyan? Students will say, we wanted to be near the water. I guess that's why they didn't go to Indiana Wesleyan. So if you go to the ocean and you enjoy the beach and you enjoy the waves coming in, would you think to say, I saw this yesterday? No. Of course, maybe if you were terribly depressed, you would say that. Sometimes I think that if Prozac had been invented back in the day, we wouldn't have had so much great art and literature. Virginia Woolf, Robert Schumann, and maybe Kohelet as well. But consider this. Kohelet is a great antidote to egotism. Because if you're staring at the ocean and seeing the waves coming in, you realize that it has nothing to do with you. And that's a very important insight, that the world doesn't revolve around me, that the world doesn't revolve around you. The waves came in yesterday. The waves will come in tomorrow. You might even say that the waves are indifferent, but I'm not sure if we would say that. They're just not. It's not as if they are a person who can choose to be indifferent or concerned. They're just not of your scale. So Kohelet reminds us that the drama that we put upon existence with ourselves in center stage is not the best way to look at things. So I find that Kohelet by itself is awfully bleak, but Kohelet as a corrective to the I'm at the center is very important. We'll have this same idea now taken from natural occurrences to human affairs.